Hey, welcome back everybody. Happy Wednesday out there. Great to see you. And we've got a lot of new information in today's video regarding this big impactful storm on the way this weekend. And a lot of these changes overnight in the models are really going to affect what you see at your location. So definitely make sure to stay tuned throughout the video as we discuss these changes and tell you who's maybe a little bit more likely to see snow and who might now be a little less likely to see snow. Because again, a lot of these shifts were pretty major overnight. So again, we'll break that down for you throughout this video. Also, if you haven't already subscribed, definitely consider doing so. Make sure to hit that bell for the latest notifications so you'll be notified every time I upload another update on this storm system, as well as future storms down the road. And of course, like the video and comment. Let me know where you're watching from and kind of what you're expecting with this storm system as we go into this weekend. Now, with all of that said, let's go ahead and jump right into it because I don't want to leave you in any suspense here as we continue to analyze these models and forecast this weekend's storm system. So starting off with our water vapor loop like we normally do here, again, you'll notice kind of a bit of a mixed bag here. So along the East Coast, we did have that Clipper system and some northwest flow move through overnight. That led to some pretty good snow totals for a lot of folks. So if you saw snow overnight, let me know how much you saw. I'd love to see those reports and, definitely always cool to see how that forecast verifies. Now, as for this morning, we're still seeing some snowfall, actually, especially kind of up here into the northeast where we have some leftover precipitation. And you folks kind of around the Boston area and down towards the Cape really saw a pretty good thumping of snow early this morning, led to probably a good inch or two falling in some isolated spots throughout that area. And we talked about that in yesterday's video, and sure enough, it happened. Now, as we go throughout the day today, all of this kind of piece of energy and this troughing that is over the eastern United States will slowly shift off towards the east and eventually work its way off the Atlantic seaboard, and that will make way for that big storm system that will be making its way into the Pacific Northwest really within the next day or two, to eventually dive into the Great Plains and then impact the eastern United States going into this weekend. So taking a look at kind of radar imagery right now, as well as those watches, warnings, and advisories out there, and you'll notice again, we are definitely still seeing some leftover precipitation along the East Coast. A lot of this falling as some light snow through much of the Northeast, and then some rain, maybe even a little bit of some moderate rainfall down here towards southeastern Virginia. Now, if you are in southeast Virginia, let me know. Maybe a couple of snowflakes, maybe some sleet pellets mixing in there. I'd love to hear those reports from you folks. Now, zooming back in here a little bit more, you'll see this morning we're still also dealing with some northwest flow into the mountains, and that is going to continue to allow those snow totals to pile up throughout the day today, but will begin to wind down as we get into this afternoon and evening, and then we can finally really get those final measurements on exactly how much snow fell. Now, outside of there, pretty quiet day in store for a lot of folks. Again, still some very heavy precipitation as this atmospheric river continues into the northwestern United States out near Oregon and Washington state. And that atmospheric river is eventually going to lead to a storm system out of the Pacific that kind of spins its way in here, and then eventually that is what's going to turn into our big storm this weekend. So everything here in the world of weather is always connected, and sure enough, what you folks see up there out west within the next couple of days is what's going to lead way to our problems in the east in the next couple of days following. So again, always kind of interesting to see how those things connect. Okay, so I'm going to start here with the next couple of days with our NAM model here and kind of showing you what we're expecting with the evolution of that current snow that's ongoing. And then we're going to dive into that big time storm system. I'm going to show you a couple different models, and we'll kind of analyze all the impacts that are possible this weekend as we continue to kind of, fine tune those details. So again, over the next couple of days, or really over the next couple of hours, I should say, we're still going to see some snow funneling into sections of the mountains from North Carolina up through the Northeast throughout the day today. That will again eventually wind down for southern sections of the mountains into this evening, as that kind of hose of moisture gets closed off a little bit. Now, as that's happening, we will have a bit of a clipper system kind of swing on through the northeast over night tonight and into early tomorrow. That very well could bring a good, burst of snow to folks up into sections of western New York State and into sections of Pennsylvania overnight tonight. So you'll notice, again, this is about 4 or 5 a.m. tomorrow morning. Here's that plume of snow kind of working on through the northeast. So again, could bring a good, quick dusting to a couple of inches, maybe even for some of you folks who kind of luck out a little bit more out of that. But it will continue to weaken as it moves into the northeast. And by the time you're really waking up tomorrow about 8, 9 o'clock, it's kind of beginning to fizzle out a little bit. And then we're just left with some lake effect snow showers throughout the day into much of upstate New York and even down into Pennsylvania through the afternoon hours of our Thursday before going into our early morning hours of Friday here. Things kind of calm down, but as that's happening, our storm system begins to slowly build back out towards the plains. And that, of course, is what is going to lead to all of these impacts this weekend for a lot of folks. All right, one more thing I will also mention here are temperatures over the next couple of days. And again, thanks to this kind of Alberta clipper that moved through overnight, we do have some cooler temperatures out there. So for this afternoon, we are expecting below average temperatures up and down much of the East Coast, from Florida all the way up to Maine. And that will last throughout all day today, through overnight tonight, even into sections of tomorrow morning. But that's when that warm-up trend kind of begins a little bit. So I think Thursday afternoon should be about average for most folks. Before going into Friday, we really warm up, and you'll notice these reds really take over the map ahead of that potent system going into this weekend. So again, a lot of swings over the next couple of days in terms of temperatures, and all of this warm air is going to become a problem whenever we look at that severe weather map here in a little bit for this weekend. Anytime we have this much instability and warm air in December, always spells trouble, especially whenever you see storm systems kind of begin to feed off of that. Okay, so that's kind of, the next couple of days. Now let's dive into the overnight model runs and what we saw in terms of this weekend storm. And again, a lot of changes that we need to kind of analyze here. So I'm going to start with the map we have normally started with the past couple of videos, our 500 millibar height vorticity map. Again, this just kind of shows spin in the atmosphere and shows where we're seeing that troughing out there. So a great example of it is kind of what we have seen over the past couple of days. This is that storm system, or that trough, if you will, that kind of brought some of that northwest flow snow overnight and is continuing to do so today. So again, anytime we see any kind of kinks in the atmosphere like this, or an axis of a trough, which you'll notice I'll kind of draw in dotted lines here on your map, that's whenever we kind of have trouble a little bit in terms of, dynamic active weather. So that's just kind of one example on your map. Now, an even better example is going to be this weekend's storm. So here it comes. It kind of works into the Pacific Northwest. You'll notice all of this energy begins to ride into the country from Washington and Oregon, going into our day tomorrow. Now, eventually going into overnight tomorrow and into early Friday, and then finally Friday afternoon, this trough really begins to turn into a trough. And you'll notice here's that very defined kind of kink in the atmosphere, and here's that axis that I was talking about a little bit earlier. So moving this ahead, going into Saturday afternoon and Saturday evening, again, here's that trough. It's not hard to see. Very, vibrant colors on your map indicating that spin as the wind has to ride around this trough. And that, of course, is going to lead to all sorts of problems this weekend. Now, one thing I do kind of want to dive into a little bit here in terms of the scientific side of things is, obviously we can tell there's a trough here, but there's a little bit more than just knowing there's a trough that is going to, be very important as to what our weather is over this coming week. So there's kind of different kinds of troughs. There are positively tilted troughs, neutrally tilted troughs, and then negatively tilted troughs. And those kind of become more and more severe in terms of impacts as you go through the progression. So this right here is a positively tilted trough. You'll notice the whole thing's kind of tilted this way or in a positive orientation. That's generally the least impactful kind of trough. Now, as we move this ahead, you'll notice it turns a bit more neutral, or it kind of, turns upright, and that trough axis is more vertical. This is kind of the next tier in the progression of a trough, and this is when things become a little bit more severe. The final phase is a negatively tilted trough, and you'll notice this trough gets there going into the, kind of end of this weekend, and that meaning it's just kind of, now tilted this way a little bit. Now, this is important for a couple different reasons, and we'll go ahead and dive into that. Again, it gets more severe as we go through the progressions here. So first off, positive, some impacts there. Neutral, a little bit more impactful, and then once you hit negative, this is when things kind of get a little bit more serious. So here's an example I pulled out of the NOAA. I've made this graphic, so when I say NOAA, I don't mean a person named Noah. I mean the federal government, NOAA. So again, you'll notice here, whenever we see these troughs like this, it's very often that we get very strong dynamic weather on the front end of that, including severe storms. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean severe as in tornadoes. It can mean severe as in just very windy and very active. And another thing that this graphic doesn't quite show you is often we see different types of weather very close to each other. So while we could be seeing severe weather here, we could also very well be seeing snow just as easily kind of on the backside of the trough where that cold air is funneling in. So that's why it's going to be very important to see exactly when does this trough hit that negative tilt. So if it were to hit negative tilt back out here into the plains, we'd see most of those impacts kind of out in front of it through the Mississippi River Valley. If it hits negative tilt like some of these overnight models are now showing, a little bit closer towards the mountains in the east, and we could see more of those severe impacts kind of more into the East Coast. And that is something that models have kind of been latching on a little bit overnight. This time yesterday, this thing was hitting negative tilt a lot closer towards kind of Arkansas, Louisiana, and that led to, extreme impacts through much of the Great Lakes in those model runs. Overnight, now it's showing negative tilt not really occurring until it hits the Appalachia chain. So again, very important details here that we have to focus on, as that will really ultimately lead to what impacts everyone sees. So now we've kind of talked about the science behind this a little bit, let's dive in and focus on, what exactly does this mean in terms of on-the-ground impacts for your location. So we'll move this ahead a little bit. We'll start with our European model, and it's also the one I just showed you the vorticity map on. But honestly, the European and the GFS have come into pretty good agreement there. And again, both showing that negatively tilted trough, kind of holding off until about this point. So this would be early Saturday into Sunday morning. So let me back this up a little bit. Still, you'll notice we definitely still get some rain throughout the day Friday through sections of the southern plains, likely even throughout the day Saturday, that rain shield really picking up. And by the time we're hitting Saturday afternoon, this is when the storm's really kind of trying to get its act together a little bit. This is when we're going to have the shot at some severe weather down here into the southern tier of the storm system. And we'll definitely have to watch that. But it's going into Sunday now that as this trough turns negatively tilted, this is when the storm system becomes a little bit more dynamic. And going into Sunday afternoon, you'll notice still that squall line with a chance of severe weather to the south, but also, as I talked about earlier, once we hit this negative tilt, that's when cold air really funnels into the backside of these storm systems. So it's very likely that we could get a very maybe potent band of very heavy wet snow on the backside of this storm system. And that's what the overnight European model here is showing. While we're still dealing with very windy, rainy, and even stormy conditions on the front side of that trough, again, as it's turning negatively tilted, it's also when we could get a very impressive band of some snow on the backside, and that band of snow could get relatively far south. Folks watching kind of in eastern Tennessee, western North Carolina mountains, up through the western Virginias, maybe even eastern Kentucky, don't let your guard down. You got a chance at maybe a pretty good thumping of snow on the backside of this storm system going into our Sunday and Monday. So it's very different than what we were looking at yesterday. In fact, yesterday I was talking about that greatest snow threat kind of being up here towards Michigan, Illinois, Indiana. Well, now that entire blob has shifted this way. And I also noted that. I said wherever this low pressure forms is going to be very key in exactly where we see that snow, and the model's trending further east overnight means that band of snow is also further east, now into the Appalachia chain, up from the Virginias into Pennsylvania, New York State. And again, as we go further in time and this trough becomes more and more negatively tilted, this low pressure is going to get stronger and stronger as that pressure gradient increases. And those impacts are only going to become stronger as the storm continues up the East Coast. And eventually, going into Monday afternoon, this storm should hit about max intensity somewhere over eastern Canada, and that's when the winds will be the worst, and the snowfall and the rain will be the worst, and kind of everything maxes out before going into next Tuesday, we finally clear out. So that's one model, that's the European. Let's show you the GFS now and see what kind of differences we have between the two. And you'll notice kind of the same general start to the storm system. Rain begins to pick up for much of the the Mississippi River Valley through much of the day Saturday. And also that's when this storm kind of, begins to also finally turn negatively tilted here going into our Sunday, much like the European model showed. Now, the GFS takes a little bit longer for low pressure to really form along the front. In fact, what it kind of does here is it forms an initial low pressure, and then that kind of quickly shoots off up into Canada before moving ahead later on into the weekend. Kind of secondary areas of low pressure form further south along the front and move up it as it continues to work east. Now, what that solution would do is something very interesting as well. Moving this ahead, should that occur, we could very well get, again, snow on the backside. GFS is a little less excited about it, but still, you'll notice here on the backside, look at that cold air trying to wrap around and change some of that rain over to snow. Now, the GFS does wait until getting up into New England for that process to happen. The European kind of begun it a little further south and again showed snow potentially as far south here as sections of Tennessee and the Ohio River Valley. So definitely still differences between the two models, but they're definitely in more agreement that that negative tilt doesn't really occur until we get into the East Coast, meaning those higher impacts will wait until kind of up and down the I-95 corridor. Okay, so again, that's kind of the trends we've seen in the models overnight. Let's now discuss each impact at a time. We'll start with severe weather, then we'll shift to that winter weather impacts, and then we'll round this whole thing out with looking at potential wind gusts, which still look quite impressive with this storm system. So this is for Saturday afternoon. We do have a marginal risk of severe weather up from the Storm Prediction Center for much of western Arkansas, eastern Oklahoma, and just kind of the Texarkana area in general here. And this could be for all hazards, from strong winds to some isolated tornadoes to maybe even some large hail here. Again, only a marginal risk right now, so this is definitely about as low as it can get while still having a threat, but also we're still 3 days away, so it's very possible, and I'd argue even likely, that this threat kind of uptrends up towards a slight risk, maybe even an enhanced risk by the time we finally get to Friday. And same story for Saturday, another threat of severe weather, this time just shifted further off to the east and south from the Memphis area back towards Little Rock and down towards the Houston metro, and then kind of back over towards Baton Rouge and Jackson, Mississippi in this threat area for our Saturday. Again, all hazards possible, including tornadoes on Saturday afternoon. And again, this could be uptrended as we get closer. We'll definitely watch the model trends and see kind of what happens here. But what we are pretty confident in is we are going to have some ingredients for severe weather by the time we get into this weekend. So we'll start off by taking a look at that instability, and you'll notice going into Friday afternoon here, that plume of storm fuel or cape or just instability, however you want to look at it, kind of begins to funnel northward again as early as Friday afternoon. So that's why we have that threat area on Friday kind of in the circled area. Going into our Saturday, moving this ahead a little bit, that storm fuel continues to shift off towards the south and east, this time in that area that we had the second threat from kind of Memphis all the way down towards Houston and up through Louisiana and much of Mississippi through the day Saturday. And then going into Sunday, less amounts of storm fuel, but still enough of a kind of slim band of it through Georgia and the Carolinas, maybe even Virginia, that we need to watch Sunday as well for the threat of some severe weather through sections of the southeast. And then luckily, that storm fuel kind of dies off a little bit as the storm system pulls off to the north and cooler, nicer weather funnels in behind. Okay, so again, that's the instability. That's one part of the severe weather. The other part, obviously, is we need some spinning wind. So looking at bulk shear or just kind of change in speed or direction of the winds with height, you'll notice going into our Friday, we definitely have some here through sections of the southern Great Plains, although nothing off the charts here, but still enough to cause problems before going into Saturday, and that's when this low-level jet and this mid-level jet really begin to crank up, and you'll notice very strong belts of winds here kind of as the wind kind of goes and diverges outside of this trough here, and that again leading to the chance of some severe storms on Saturday, and same story going into Sunday. Again, this very strong belt of wind shear continuing as this trough begins to really turn negatively tilted, and that's generally when the wind shear really begins to maximize. Now, obviously, this is important for severe weather, but this is also important just for, strong winds in general. So you'll notice going into overnight Sunday into Monday, look at this very strong belt of winds. That are winds getting up near 100, 120 miles an hour, kind of here in the middle part of the atmosphere. Should we get strong enough downburst and strong enough rainfall, it is very possible some of these winds begin to mix down at the lower levels. Now, I'm not saying we're going to see 100-mile-an-hour winds, but it's very possible in sections of the Northeast, as the storm's really beginning to kind of occlude and hit its max strength, we could hit, hurricane-force wind gust along the southern New England coastlines going into overnight Sunday and into early Monday before things, again, finally clear out. So we'll take another look at the wind map on the surface here kind of towards the end of the video, but just so you know, that is something I'm pretty concerned about, are those power outages, that coastal flooding, and just the wind in general. Okay, so that's severe weather we've talked about. Now let's kind of take a look at some of the winter weather, which again, I'm sure a lot of you are probably going to be very intrigued to hear about. So we'll move this map ahead in time a little bit. And this map, I should kind of start by saying, these are our Euro Ensemble members, and this shows the chance of seeing at least an inch of snowfall if you lump all the ensembles together and kind of pull an average here. So moving this ahead into kind of starting as early as Sunday afternoon, Euro Ensemble kind of shows a band here through the Ohio River Valley from kind of St. Louis back towards Indianapolis, up towards Detroit, and into Ohio, having the best shot at maybe seeing an inch of snow, but also still relatively low, only about a 20% chance, 25% chance of that happening. It's once we kind of move into overnight Sunday and into Monday, that's when the European model really cranks up those snow chances through much of the Northeast and back into the Ohio River Valley and also into the higher terrains of West Virginia and North Carolina. So looking at this point, getting up into Pennsylvania, New York, we're starting to pass that 50% chance mark. Same story for higher elevations of West Virginia, getting up past 75% chance of seeing at least an inch of snow. And also kind of chances of that happening, mixing back down here towards Tennessee, Kentucky. You folks kind of far south there that necessarily aren't in the mountains, you might have a shot at seeing some snow out of this storm system. And then those chances continue to increase up into the interior Northeast through much of New York State, into Vermont and New Hampshire by the time we're getting into overnight Monday. So that's the Euro Ensemble members. Let's take a look at the GFS Ensemble members, see what kind of differences we have between the two. Well, you'll notice going into Sunday afternoon, again, a pretty similar area, anywhere kind of through the Ohio River Valley. The GFS does include more of the Great Lakes, I will mention here, compared to the Euro. And once again, much like the Euro Ensembles, continue to increase those chances throughout the overnight Sunday and into Monday through much of the Northeast. So you'll notice definitely if you go back to yesterday's video or the video before when we were looking at these maps, this entire blob of kind of snow chances was shifted much further off to the north and west. So we definitely had that trend further to the east with those snowfall chances. And again, all of that, as I've been talking about, because of kind of the progression of this trough. When is it turning negative? That's going to be so important for who sees the worst impacts out of this storm system. And speaking of, kind of rough impacts, we'll switch on over to wind gusts here, and this is going to be a doozy for a lot of folks. So moving this into Saturday afternoon, you'll notice nothing too off the charts here, just kind of a gusty day through much of the plains, the Ohio River Valley, but nothing we're not necessarily accustomed to. And again, these are max wind gusts, so not necessarily what you're seeing the entire time, but kind of the worst of it. And moving this ahead further into time here, going into overnight Saturday into the early morning hours of Sunday, this is when things kind of begin to pick up through the East Coast. And you'll notice going into overnight Sunday into the early morning hours of Monday, this is when things really get kind of rough. We're seeing wind gusts here up and down the East Coast from South Carolina all the way up into the Northeast, into tropical storm strength, and even into hurricane force strength through sections of the Northeast and into the Appalachia chain from North Carolina as the winds really crank up on the backside of this low pressure system. And those winds should continue throughout the early morning hours of Monday, before hopefully clearing out by the time we go overnight Monday into Tuesday. Now, I'm going to zoom this map in on the Northeast specifically because I'm becoming increasingly concerned for this area in terms of strong winds. So let's kind of dive in a little bit more here. Again, going into kind of overnight Sunday, this is when things really begin to pick up. Winds gusting into that 50-mile-an-hour range through much of the interior Northeast. And going into overnight, it only gets worse. So kind of in a place like Long Island, winds could be gusting up into the 60s, maybe even up into the 70s by the time you're waking up Monday morning. And that, really becomes quite a threat in terms of power lines, coastal flooding. Really worried about all of that here from Long Island up through coastal Connecticut into Rhode Island and into much of eastern Massachusetts and eventually into coastal Maine going into Monday afternoon before things finally calm down a little bit going into our Tuesday of next week. So again, all sorts of impacts here. We've talked about severe weather, we've talked about wintry weather, we've talked about wind. Some folks honestly could get a little bit of all of them. You might start with some rain and some wind, maybe even a couple, strikes of lightning. Then you could switch over to a heavy wet snow with the wind still howling before things finally clear out. So it's a very dynamic system that is going to bring a lot of impacts to a lot of different people in a lot of different ways. Now, one thing I will add here is on the backside of this storm system, some good news. The temperatures do cool down a little bit, so kind of ahead of it, obviously, it's going to be very warm as all of that wind sucks up a lot of Atlantic and Gulf air, obviously increasing the water vapor in the air as well as temperatures as a whole. But on the backside, by the time we're getting into next Monday afternoon and next Tuesday, some blues do work back into the forecast, indicating below average temperatures. And those below average temperatures may not hang around for a while, but it could be interesting because we could have another storm system kind of after this one that I'm not really going to talk about in this video, but that one, could potentially latch onto some of these cooler temperatures and cause some, interesting weather into next week. And again, we'll save that for then. We've got a lot to get through before we get to next week, but just know ahead of time, this active pattern does look to continue through much of the middle of the month and even potentially into the end of the month. Okay, well, again, that was a lot. I know we went through a lot. This video is going to push almost 30 minutes, which I know is a long time and a lot of talking, but the system is just so dynamic and there's so many potential impacts and there are so many changes in the models that it's just kind of, a lot of information that I've got to get out to you folks as we continue to prepare. Now, I will add, as we kind of get into tomorrow's video and especially Friday's video, we will be able to kind of dive more in on those specific impacts. I know the past couple videos have been generally just kind of broad, and you'll notice the reason for that is we're still trying to find out exactly where this low pressure is going to form and exactly how strong it's going to be. But as we get through the next couple of days, we should be able to kind of really iron out those details and go more in depth on snow totals, rain totals, who exactly is going to see severe weather, how bad is that severe weather going to be, so on and so forth. With that said, though, again, I'll let you get back to your day. I know this video has been going on for a long time, so again, have a great rest of your Wednesday out there, and I'll see you all tomorrow.